Hello, everybody. Welcome to this week's version of DevOps Derek Weekly. I'm DevOps Derek. Sorry, I make the same joke every week, but also known as Derek Campbell. Today, I have Mr. Pete Gallagher with me. Hey, Pete, how are you going today?
Hey, good. Not bad. You?
Good. I'm good. It's Monday night. I've got energy. It's very dark outside, obviously, with daylight savings going. But apart from that, I'm good.
Mm.
I'm good. I'm good. So obviously today we're going to be talking. Actually, so tell us a little bit about yourself. Where do you hail from? What sort of tech is your thing?
How long have you got?
Oh well, 45 minutes.
Oh yeah, fair enough. We might not do any IoT. We'll just talk about that instead then. I'm from the Midlands in England. I've sort of born and raised in this area. IoT is generally what my stack is. I've been doing IoT since essentially there wasn't an IoT. Way back in 1999, I was making modem connected back then Royal Mail stamp vending machines. We were able to dial into them and pull out audit logs and event history and that sort of stuff. So that was quite fun. That was straight from university that I was doing that. So yeah, quite a few years back. And I worked for that company for about a decade and then started up on my own. And I didn't do much IoT for a few years, actually. I was just sort of doing whatever anybody gave me. So a lot of WordPress stuff even, and desktop applications and that sort of stuff. But it wasn't long until I picked the IoT back up again. And things like the Raspberry Pi got me back into that again, I think. So yeah, it's all
Yeah.
good. I mean, other than that, I mean, I run or co-organise 3 different meetup groups. Four really, five if you count Azure-ish, and six if you count doing a podcast as well. So I run Nuts IoT. That's my little baby, and then I co-organise along with Jess White .NET Knots. And at the moment we're not doing very much with it, but I co-organise Knots Dev Workshop with Kosha. I mean that's a workshop-based meetup, and really it wants to be in person. That so we've not done anything with that virtually. I'm also a member of a networking group on the board of directors of a group called Lati in Loughborough. We're like a high tech meetup. And then, yeah, I mentioned Azure-ish, and that's a new Twitch show that me and Liam Gulliver and Jonathan Relfer have just started, where it's pretty much scrap heap challenge. Sort of 3 middle-aged guys searching Stack Overflow, pretty much. So that's quite fun. That's every other week.
Nice.
And then, yeah, we're the Agile Engineering podcast with Misha Bell and Louise Paling and Liam and Jonathan again and myself. And we tend to get a guest on every now and again too. So, yeah, that and the speaking and the blogging and all that other stuff and work on top of that and a family. It keeps me busy.
Wow. Okay. So you're a busy man. So you're basically everywhere, and obviously, just a shout out to Liam and obviously Peter as Azurish Live is I won a T-shirt. So obviously,
Oh, you
will
won it?
see
Of course
me.
you did.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um,
Awesome. This one, in
Unfortunately,
fact.
I don't. Yeah, I don't have it yet. But what we'll need
Oh,
to do is I'll probably need to get yourself. Need to get yourself and Liam on, and then obviously we can all just
and Jonathan. Yeah,
yeah, and Jonathan,
yeah,
and
yeah,
we can
yeah.
all just pull
Absolutely. Yeah.
together with Azurish Live
Oh, we'd
t-shirts.
love
So
to. Yeah, yeah.
definitely,
Absolutely.
definitely. Well, I'll post about that. We'll definitely do something there. We can all wear our matching t-shirts.
Get
Um,
on, brand. Yeah.
yeah, well, that's it. You got to. So obviously you're saying about IoT. So just for the people who don't know, what is IoT?
Yeah, I mean, we had a brief chat about this just before we came on air, and I mean, that's the common question when people say do IoT. Well, what's IoT? I mean, the simple explanation for that is a whole heap of devices that can talk to each other and the cloud now, really. Although before the cloud there was still IoT, and before the internet there was still IoT, really. But it was sort of machine to machine stuff. So the I in IoT came around and then everything went through the internet and then we got the cloud and stuff like that. So I mean that's the basic explanation, but when you start looking, there's so many different explanations that sort of fork off that. And in fact, the IEEE have made like an 85-page document, and they've titled it towards a definition of IoT. So it takes 85 pages to not actually get to a definition of
Wow.
what IoT is. So it really depends, and it's so broad and touches so many different services and platforms, and yeah, you could be there all day just trying to figure out, the nuances of what that actually means. But yeah, connected things, yeah. Even cows, connected cows. I like
No, I
that.
like it. I like it. The reception though would be terrible. The Wi-Fi reception to be able to connect all the sensors would probably be a little bad.
You'd
Um,
be surprised. Farms these days and farmers, they make use of IT heavily. So yeah, their infrastructure is actually pretty good these days on modern farms. Yeah, it's
I've got.
impressive.
I'll definitely jump into that one a little bit later. So, obviously, you're saying about IoT. Obviously, this is based on Azure. So, what's Azure IoT and what sort of benefits does it provide?
Yeah, I mean, there's plenty to the Azure IoT stack. I mean, most people would start with an Azure IoT hub, which is kind of like a telephone switchboard that all of your devices connect to, and there's two-way comms in and out of the IoT hub, and it kind of sits at the edge of the cloud there. And then once you've got the messages into that, then you can take them out and plug them into any of the Azure services. But I mean, there's more to it than that. There's Azure Digital Twins, and there's IoT Central, and stuff like that as well that you can get involved with that use some of those same services, but build on top of them as a piece of software or platform. So yeah, there's a whole heap that you can go and explore in there.
Yeah, cool. So, if you say someone right is like, so they're maybe a .NET dev or a Java dev or something, and they're tuning in. Where would they start to learn about Azure IoT?
Yeah, I would point them immediately at the Docs and Learn section of Microsoft's. It's fantastic, the Learn stuff that they've got on there now. Fully curated learning paths and individual module level learning that you can take on and learn just about the bits that you're interested in. So yeah, I mean, I've got a browser window here. We can switch to that, and I can show you sort of where I always point people. I was involved in the creation of this AZ220, and I have to stop myself from saying AZ220 because, but this exam is the Microsoft Azure IoT Developer exam. It's actually a really good exam. It covers a broad range of topics. But if you come to the AZ220 page, then you can find a bit more information about the exam here. But if you scroll past a lot of that, then there's a bunch of links here to some learning paths that'll help you then go and pass the exam. So the reason why I start here is that if you want to sort of maybe you're just trying to get into IoT or you're in it and you're not touching all of the services, this trying to study for this exam is a really good way to be able to boost your knowledge up to a level that can cover all of that, and perhaps give yourself a bit more career breadth and stuff like that. But I mean, you can see these here. If I actually go straight to the Learn site, then I can filter it down here on the IoT topics specifically. And you can see, I mean, there's 46 different modules and learning paths down here you can choose from. So, I mean, everything from an introduction to Azure IoT through to Azure Sphere and developing IoT solutions for Azure Sphere and IoT Central that I mentioned earlier. And yeah, it's really broad. So this is great. It touches so many different parts of Azure as well. So there's so much interest. There's something in there for everybody, really.
That's really cool. I've got to say, I absolutely love Microsoft Learn. We see,
Yeah.
I've been going through all the certifications recently. I've got the AZ 103, 303, 304, the AZ 900, the AI 900, the DP 900. And it's honestly, do you know, honestly, I absolutely love this. So definitely check it out. So I can see there that you've got IoT, Central, Edge, and Hub. What are the differences between those services?
Yeah, I mean, if you start at the bottom of that list, actually, it's the IoT Hub.
Yeah.
Nearly all of these, in fact, I'd say all of these services that you're talking about there will have an IoT Hub in it somewhere. And it's basically an event hub, but with two-way comms and device management built on top of it, and a whole heap of other stuff. But I mean, the central part of it is that. And yeah, as I said earlier, an IoT hub sits right at the edge of the cloud. So this is your ingress point for all of the devices to connect to Azure, and you can have millions of devices connected, all sending messages, and they'll never get a busy signal. You can take those messages then, and you can just leave them there if you want. It'd be a bit boring, but you can. But you can route them out to things like a service bus if you wanted to, and then out to a Logic app, or you can do things like time series insights or stream analytics, or just stick it into a bit of blob storage and do something with it later, or take it out to Power BI. Or once you've ingressed your data into that IoT hub, it really is sort of a nexus point for you to be able to then spider out and do what you want with it. Then you've got things like IoT Edge is a part almost of an IoT hub, but it's a Docker runtime, albeit a bit more complicated than that runs on the device. And you're going to move some of the processing of from the cloud down onto the device, and that way you get this faster feedback loop. So, I mean, say you're doing like moving a robot arm or something like that. You don't want to have to send stuff to Azure and wait for it to come back before you decide that it needs to stop because it's picked a man up. That stuff probably wants to happen on the device, and you can do AI, and you can put a SQL Server workload on there if you want, or do any amount of ML or storage or that sort of stuff. You don't need to spend your cloud credits doing that. You can let something like a Raspberry Pi even just sit there and do that sort of menial stuff before you process all of the data and then send it up to the cloud and then do what else you want with it. The great thing is that as it's running like a Docker image on there, or a set of Docker image modules are actually called for IoT Edge, then you can use that to keep everything up to date, and that IoT Edge runtime will coordinate all of that for you. You just publish your little modules to a registry, and then the whole lot will just keep itself up to date, and that's at scale as well. So there's some good benefits to IoT Edge. And then you mentioned IoT Central, and I always get these two things mixed up, but I think it's a platform as a service, isn't it? These things, but I think it's software as a service. Anyway, either way, it's a whole piece of software that Microsoft have created on top of IoT Hub and some other services like time series insights and device provisioning service, and they've kind of wrapped that up into a more friendly looking platform. And in fact, I've not got the tab open, but I can actually show you an instance of that. I've got one that I play with here. I've got some temperature and humidity and light sensors sitting there, and I've got them hooked up through an ESP8266 actually, and that's all going up here to IoT Central, and it gives you a dashboarding functionality so that you can just show the data that you're really interested in at a glance. And then you've got time series insights that we're calling analytics here, and you can select which bits of telemetry you want to pop out on a TSI and analyze that, and then you get some nice graphs of what my office is doing, temperature, humidity and light level wise over the last, I don't know, that's 14 days there. And you can even select bits of data and download it as a CSV or view it as a table and do stuff like that. So I mean, this is a simplified TSI instance. If you've ever tried to do time series insights, it's actually quite a big product. There's quite a lot to it. All sorts of windowing and stuff in it. So this just gives you sort of an easier use case for, say, a business person. So you can get a developer to set all of this lot up and then just give it to them, and you can see it's quite manageable. But if you're a business person, you're not going to be able to produce something like this as fast as you can. There's a bit of setup work involved in this, but actually it's quite easy to get going with IoT Central. I really do like it, and I've got 2 clients I'm doing work for at the moment that I'm basing work just on this. And the good thing about it is that once you've sent the messages in there, they're not stuck. You can export them. There's a couple of different ways to export it, but you can stick it out onto an event hub here and then trigger, say, an Azure function. And then if you don't like the fact that your data's kind of trapped in IoT Central, you can grab that data and stick it in a SQL Server database, or in blob storage is another option up there, or out onto a service bus queue and trigger Logic apps. And there's it's really good at sort of giving you a place to start, and then you can build the solution from that. There's a downside, of course, because you don't then get direct access to those underlying services, but there's enough exporting functionality there for you to be able to get on and use, essentially.
That sounds really cool. I mean, what I can see just now is there's a lot of if this then that So what you could do is, if it's outside of a temperature, then adjust the temperature.
Yep.
Obviously humidity, etc., which is
Yeah,
really
I mean,
cool.
there's rules here that you can do stuff with, and it's exactly that. So you can set particular, say the temperature, like you've just said, there is greater than, and then like 100 or something. Then you can tell it to do something like send an email or fire off a webhook or monitor action groups. And this Azure monitor action groups lets you, if you set it up right, you can send text messages from there too. Or, do logic apps. I can't remember what's underneath that's in the way. Power Automate, yeah. So that Power Platform,
Right.
which I've not spent any time in actually, but is allegedly awesome. I need to have a look at it when I get some time.
I hear good things about it. It's funny, I'm actually trying to get my wife into it just now. She's a big Power BI
Okay,
fan.
I like
So
it.
it's always a little bit interesting. If you actually see, if you extend out the height of your browser, you can actually see more screens. So see if you just make that a little bit,
Yeah,
actually get,
what I've got here is I've
ah, you've
so that
got
might help you a little bit. So I've got a 49-inch wide monitor here,
right,
in
right.
like and I've kind of set this to a 16 by 9.
One,
I mean, if I can zoom out a
make
little
it,
bit, but I don't know if you can see that
nope,
then.
make it wider. There we go. There we go. See if you make it wider, it will actually fill most of the screen. But this is awesome. I've not. I won't lie. I have saw the monitor on Twitter. I am jealous. I've
I do
got
like it.
I've got dual 34-inch ultra wide curves, but that single pane. Look, one of the guys, he's got a really nice. I think he probably has some. Is it a Samsung?
Mine's a Philips, but yeah,
Right.
there's a good Samsung one as well. But
Yeah.
I mean, I bought this not long after the lockdown happened, and
Yeah.
yeah, you couldn't get them. You couldn't get monitors or webcams for love nor money. In fact, I think people are still struggling to get webcams. I had
It's
this on order at Amazon for like 3 months, and they messed me around for ages, and I just got bored of them. And I think I ordered it from Laptops Direct in the end, and it just came the next day. And I kind of wished I'd done that to begin with.
yeah.
It was a little bit more expensive, but yeah, it was worth it. I
It's
say
really
that single pane is
it
dead
is
handy
nice.
until you
It
want to
is nice.
present, and then it's a bit more complicated. But
Power Toys is my new favorite tool.
yeah, yep,
That and
I've got that.
snapping it, it's beautiful. Anyway, we should probably talk about IoT instead of our
Why?
huge
Why?
monitors.
This
Um,
monitor's internet connected. It's an IoT device.
well, that's it. Like you could. I'm surely sure you could add a Wi-Fi module to. Actually, that's a shout. Actually, a wireless. Why is that not a thing? Anyway, IoT. Um, It's funny though, because obviously looking at the products, I noticed IoT Central and IoT Hub. That, they need to come up with a better name there. Central and Hub, that's the same thing. But yeah, but no, I think you've done a great thing. I think I like about it is the fact that I'm obviously I love Azure and Azure DevOps, etc. But home automation is a bit of my thing. Like I use Home Assistant a lot,
Oh, okay.
and then obviously on my Pi, and honestly, I am getting. It doesn't obviously offer the same sort of stuff as this, but it's really cool. And honestly, do you know what's funny? Because I won't lie, it's 6 p.m. every night, and it's funny. I have to turn off the heating every single Monday evening because at 6 p.m. my heating comes on, and obviously
Ah,
my office is up the stairs, so you'll notice as what you might see is obviously like me pinging my wife like, please turn off the heating. But like that, I definitely. So can you obviously hook up? So you can hook up things like Raspberry Pis to Azure, and I could actually effectively use Azure to control my home temperature. Then
yeah, absolutely. And this is a big conversation as well. In that specific conversation, I saw a really good talk where you could go buy yourself a Nest thermostat and stuff like that. But I mean, those things are quite expensive.
yeah,
But I went to see, I can't remember the name of the guy, which is a real shame. But I went to see this talk, and he had hooked up a servo to just a normal mechanical thermostat, and he controlled that. Yeah, I think it's Jarvis. Have you heard of that?
it rings
Which
a
is
bell. I haven't used it, but yeah,
yeah, that's it. And he'd also hooked up these motors to his blinds, and he could open and close his blinds, and so he'd sort of automated old tech. But that was really cool. But I mean, yeah, definitely Raspberry Pi, and I love Raspberry Pi. It's just my favorite bit of kit. They've got a new Raspberry Pi 400 just been released today, which is sort of in a keyboard.
It's nice specs, got really nice specs.
Yeah, no, it's basically a Raspberry Pi 4. They've boosted the speed up a touch, which they've been able to do because inside it is a dirty great piece of metal as a heatsink. So I think that's one of the reasons why they've been able to give it a little bit of a speed boost. It's a different SoC and different chip that's on it. But for all intents and purposes, it's a Raspberry Pi 4. But the good thing with the Azure platform is they've recognised that a Raspberry Pi is a good place to start. And it's a great prototyping platform. And people scoff when you say that you're considering using it in production. But depending on where you are using it in production, I think it's perfectly fine. You can't stick it on the street and expect it to be a great production device. That's not it. But if you've got a client site that's completely monitored and internal and no one's going to touch these things, they're great. You just buy them and you're going to get a repeatable platform every time that's supported for years. But Microsoft have recognised that and they've made this Azure simulator here for a Raspberry Pi. This is cool. On the right-hand side here is node code that they've pre-populated for you. And the only thing you need to do at that point is paste in your connection string. So, I can actually go ahead and do that. If I've got an IoT hub that here's one I made earlier, and this is what you'd see when you'd created an IoT hub. So you get this introduction page, and it tells you the number of messages you used and your quotas, and the number of device to cloud messages and the number of connected device. And if I scroll down on the left hand side here, we get the IoT devices. Now I've created a few in here, but I've got a Raspberry Pi down at the bottom here. And once you go into that Raspberry Pi, then you get some connection details that you can use. And this is the connection string that we're talking about here. So if I copy that and then go into this IoT simulator, let me just refresh the page and just make sure that it's going to take what I'm going to do. And I can just, if I can get it to go in there, I can select all this stuff and delete that and paste in my connection string. And then the only thing I need to do then is press run. And if I just, if I zoom out a little bit, down at the bottom now, I know why it's doing it. It's because I've moved my screen up. There we are. I bet you can see that a little bit better now.
Yeah.
So it's actually sending messages now to the IoT hub. And if I switch my sharing, how easy is that to do? Probably not that easy. I'll do it this way.
If you add it back in, I'll add it back in the stream.
Yeah, no worries. Application window. And this. So this is it's a little bit of free software called the IoT Explorer. So this is an open source piece of sort of prototyping software that lets you have a play with IoT hubs, and you can create IoT hubs and devices and everything you can do in the portal just using this piece of software. But what it also lets you do is monitor the telemetry that's hitting the hub. So I've dived into that Raspberry Pi and I've just gone to telemetry and press run, and there's those messages appearing. So, that wasn't... Obviously, I'd created the IoT hub earlier, but trust me, that's easy. So that's the web page you saw a second ago is now sending messages up to Azure, and then this piece of software that's running on my local machine is monitoring those messages on the hub, and you can see those appearing here. So, that's a pretty fast way if you want to get going, and you know that the code that you saw there, that node code, is practically copy and pastable into a new Node project on your Pi. Obviously, you've got to set Node up and get the right version of Node, and there's a few other bits and bobs, but you've not had to write that code is the main thing. And if your goal is to play with the Azure stuff, and really the Raspberry Pi stuff is sort of secondary to that, then you don't need to worry about it at all, and you can get all of your Azure infrastructure all set up, and once you've got those messages going up there, then you can play with it. At that point, you can start routing messages and creating service buses and logic apps and sending tweets and or sending it out to blob storage and get going with that level of stuff without having to worry about I've got to go and buy all of this kit, because you want a Raspberry Pi, you've got to get a Raspberry Pi and a power supply and an SD card and get Raspbian installed and then get all of your infrastructure installed, and it's quite a lot of stuff if all you want to do is play with Azure. So that's one really good example of what you can get going with. If I just share my window again now. There we go. There's an alternative as well. So, this is the Raspberry Pi is a full Linux based machine if you didn't know what a Raspberry Pi was. But there's an Arduino flavor of that, and Microsoft have got involved with a company and made this thing called the MX Chip IoT dev kit simulator. But there's a real board here that you can go and buy off the shelf, and it's essentially an Arduino, but it's got a little OLED and a couple of buttons and stuff like that. And there's a bunch of C code here that they've written for you. And rather than pasting code into there, you can paste a connection string. In fact, let me just remember to stop this one. You can paste that same connection string into that. In fact, you can deploy the entire infrastructure here with that deploy button. But being as I've already done it, then I can just paste in the connection string and hit run. Then on the right-hand side here, you'll see that it's connecting to the IoT hub. I can press A, and then I can shake it, and that'll send a message then up to IoT hub. And I'm not switching back, but over on the left-hand side, I can see that it's that application, the IoT Explorer, has popped up that message now. So again, you can see how quickly you can get going with that level of stuff, and you can take this code and burn that onto an MX chip and get going with that as well. These are pretty cool. If you've ever seen a microbit, they're a little bit similar to that. So you get a couple of buttons and an OLED rather than LEDs, and some connections at the bottom. That's almost exactly the same connector as a microbit has got at the bottom. And it's got a built-in accelerometer and gyroscope and temperature and humidity, and it's and a microphone as well, and bits and bobs. But in fact, that somebody rickrolled that OLED on there as well, which I quite liked. So yeah, that's pretty cool.
You can actually use these then as virtual devices as well as physical devices.
Yeah, I mean, this is specifically to get people going. And in fact, when you're going through the learn topics there, they use this IoT Hub Explorer as part of that. And it's just a really good way of getting started with stuff like this, rather than having to think about all of the other stuff we were talking about there earlier.
No, this is awesome. This is awesome. I'm intrigued on there. I'm like, I need to hide my credit card. It's like, well, who's going to buy? But no,
the good thing is, if you do like an ESP8266, that's a tiny little Arduino, Wi-Fi enabled Arduino, or an ESP32 that's got built-in Bluetooth as well. Then these things are, well, not pennies, but if you order them from China and wait long enough, an 8266 you can get for a couple of quid or less, in fact. And an ESP32 for, if you wanted to go to Amazon, for instance, you could pick one up for 5 or 6 quid. So they're dead cheap, and do kind of what you want them to do under those circumstances. So they're pretty stripped back, and you'll need to connect all of the sensors and bits and bobs that you're going to need. But you program it with C++. Sadly, I mean, I'm no C++ expert. I do plenty of it, but it's a complicated way to get going. So that's the downside with it, but cheap and repeatable. So
very nice, very nice. Do you have any chips to hand by any chance?
Yeah, hold on. So this is for a client at the moment. So that there's an ESP32 essentially, but this one's actually got a GSM modem built into it. Now they're dead cool. TT Go, it's called, that particular device. And you stick a micro SIM into it, and it'll connect to a really basic 3G network. And at that point, what you'd need to do is sort of grab your data and stick it into something that's like JSON, and then send that up to something like an Azure function, and use the Azure function then to connect to the rest of your services, because you're not going to be able to program directly for GSM connected to IoT Central, but it's got Wi-Fi. So using that Wi-Fi connection, you can directly connect to IoT Central if you like. It's complicated, way more complicated than say Node or the C# equivalent even. But once you've got your code working, then it's pretty cool.
That's awesome. So the question I've been dying to ask you from the very beginning is, right, so obviously I know like there's certain use cases like temperatures, humidity, etc. You mentioned farmers earlier on, right, and cows. So I need to find what are farmers doing, and also any other use cases that you can share that you're seeing really get adoption of IoT.
Yeah, I mean, I love the connected cow thing, and this is a story that's been around for quite a while. And People usually laugh when you bring that up, or there's at least a smile. And the premise of the presentation that you'll see is that farmers spend a lot of time trying to work out when a cow is in heat. So they don't put a cow and a bull in a field anymore and just let them, do whatever they want to do. They have to use a scientific method to be able to make the cow pregnant, which isn't very pleasant. But cows are mammals, and they kind of walk around during the day and go to sleep at night. But what the cow will do if it's on heat, if it's ready to be inseminated, is it'll walk around more. So what a company called Fujitsu worked out, and this was just one example, is that if they strap essentially a Fitbit to a cow, they can watch its numbers of steps, and then they can look when those numbers of steps go up to figure out when the cow is ready. And so they did this. They did a whole heap of experimentation and produced all these nice fancy data streams and graphs of cows. And then they looked at when the farmer inseminated the cow to figure out when the best time was. And there's this specific window. I think it's 12 hours. So you've got the peak time, peak number of steps, if you will, of the cow walking around. And then I think it's 12 hours later is the perfect time to inseminate the cow. So they go and do that. But once they got that data, they started looking at it in a bit more detail. And they realized that like an hour or two before that perfect time, you would get a male cow. And an hour or two after that perfect time, you'd get a female cow. So if you were running low on any particular part of your stock, you could just inseminate. And it's all percentages, but the percentages said you're more likely one way or the other. Here we are, look. So that particular device you can see on there isn't exactly what we're talking about. But they can also, these steps, if a cow's having trouble in labour, it'll move around more. So they can get notifications at this point to say, oh, your cow's struggling, or even they'll know when a cow's about to give birth from this. So, I mean, the downside is that these cows tend to go and heat at night. And if you're a farmer, you've been up since 4 a.m. farming. So the last thing you want to do is sit around at night. So you can go to bed. And you can have a bunch of infrastructure around you that can send you a mobile notification to say, come and help your cow give birth. But it can detect like with about 80% accuracy or 90% accuracy, rather than about 50 or 40% accuracy when the right time to inseminate is. And then it can detect diseases on top of that. And yeah, you saw that collar type device there. There's all sorts of different devices they can strap to cows on their tail, for instance, and track other things that are going on.
Yeah.
We won't delve into too much detail about that. But yeah, so, I mean, obviously the reason why it's important is there's massive business. There's some billions of cows on the planet, isn't there? This is big business, certainly in America. So anything that can take the human element out of processing like that is where IoT goes. And anything that you can save money on as well. I mean, I heard a good use case where they used to have these really expensive, and I'm talking thousands of pounds worth of kit, boxes on railway lines out in the middle of nowhere, monitoring the railway line vibrations, and they're able to detect sounds and breaks in the line that way. And it used to be, like I said, thousands of pounds for these boxes. But now with the prevalence of cheap IoT, you're talking hundreds of pounds or tens of pounds even, depending on what it is you want to do. And you stick a little GSM modem in there and you can beam that up to the cloud and process that data on a great scale. And this is where instrumenting stuff that we couldn't afford to instrument before, or it was too bulky or too complicated, is where all of this energy is going to go now. And I think instrumenting humans, obviously, with things like the Fitbit and even the Amazon Alexa, we're still instrumenting ourselves. That data that is being used on our shopping habits and searching habits and what music we're playing, and exposing all of that hidden data, and it's making companies money, which is why they're doing it.
Yeah. I think what I like about it is like that is it's also about the convenience of life. It's using technology to make farmers' lives easier. Because that's the thing, like you say, there's hundreds, if not thousands of cows. If you can do something, then you may not need as many farmers, or obviously you get the end result much quicker. And it does seem as well that there seems to be a tie-in with machine learning and some IoT as well. I've been doing the machine learning stuff on Azure recently. I can see here, right, that I can imagine, if temperature is X, then obviously set it to Y, but you would actually be able to train that model. So then at that point, you don't even have to do anything. You just basically, it just goes away and does it. Is that accurate, or am I just talking nonsense?
Oh no, absolutely. And processing all of your data then and analyzing trends in that data is massively important. And I mean, this is the beauty of the cloud because I mean, storage is next to nothing. Processing it, there's a cost involved in that, but it's still way less than having to create a server farm to be able to do that. You can just spin it up and do your analysis, and then spin it down, and you're done. But yeah, looking for trends and then fault analysis and all of that. The IoT side of that is massively important. And when you're looking at this digital twin idea, I mentioned Azure Digital Twins before, and this is all about modeling the whole of your infrastructure. So if you imagine you've got a factory, you can model everything from like a tiny little sensor on a robot arm all the way through the rest of your services there to be able to build up a model of that whole factory. And in fact, if you've got many factories, then you can model many different factories connected together. But then you can use that for things like predictive maintenance to be able to work out that, perhaps you've got diggers on site or something, and you're using those sensors to be able to predict when you need to go and change the engine components. Better to do that before they break than when they're broken and they've stopped somebody from working, or in fact caused an accident. So I saw some really cool demos a while back at Build where there was like a demo industrial environment, and they were using AI to be able to watch like a room, and somebody would walk in and they'd pick up a drill and an alert would go off, and they'd recognize the person and the drill, but they'd recognize that that person hadn't been trained to use that drill. And so the guy picking the drill up or the woman picking the drill up would then set an alarm off and kick off a bunch of stuff. And then, I mean, you've got Scott Hanselman's demo that he did at Build. Did you see that? Where he'd even wired his bin up. It's just, that demo was awesome. I really enjoyed his demo. And it was great to see IoT getting some love at Build as well. There was quite a lot of IoT content there.
He's done a lot with. Do you know what's funny? I'm a diabetic, and he's actually done a lot with IoT and diabetes, different type of diabetes, unfortunately. So I can't really use any of it. But
right.
The thing I love about that is using AI, right, and IoT to fix people, right?
Yeah.
I mean, ultimately, what you're doing there is using technology to not even to cure, but certainly to treat diabetes, and you don't even have to, because obviously nowadays for type 1 you can actually have a pump permanently attached.
Yes.
And that's obviously that's where the Internet of Things.
Yeah, an artificial pancreas, things like that is just fantastic, and because I mean I'm not massively au fait with it all, but I know managing diabetes is a really difficult thing, and there are all sorts of different versions of insulin even that have fast or slow effects, and it can be really difficult. So if you can have a device do that for you, then I mean the future, the theory is that you could just replace your broken pancreas there and get it to produce the insulin at exactly the right amount at exactly the right time for you. And of course, you stick AI into that and it will predict as well, because mostly, and certainly at the moment, our days are pretty similar. And come Thursday, they're going to get even more similar in the UK, or at least in England. So you can learn from that. And it can also learn perhaps other parts of your behavior to be able to extrapolate data, to be able to improve that modeling as well. So yeah, there's a really bright future for that. Obviously, there are naysayers that may right or wrongly have an opinion on how much we should be instrumenting humans because of the privacy issues that can be exposed there and things. And then there's definitely issues in that respect. But, we'll get over that and lives will be better.
Yeah, no, that's fair enough. To be honest, I can see with it. I can see that. But I mean, ultimately, it's your body, your data, your choice. And I did like that one, the face recognition. It's basically, Dave's got the drill again. Get it off him. It's like...
Yeah, exactly. We just had Halloween and have a field day with that, wouldn't it?
Yeah, it's like, Big Dave's got the drill again. Honestly, that's brilliant. That's brilliant. And the thing is like, I think they're still really at the beginning of the journey. It feels like, like we're still very early days. Even like you say, even though you've been working on them since 1999, that, obviously very different, but it still feels early day. Like I still think AI, for instance, although very smart, it's still again, it's still at the very beginning. There's no T8000s yet. Obviously, like
How
like
do you
that.
know? Have you not
Well,
been
that's
watching
true.
Boston Dynamics?
But yeah, no, honestly, I think I see. Once I'm really excited. Honestly, you've given me a bit. I've already got enough Microsoft Learn stuff that I'm trying to do. I don't want more, but at the same time, it's definitely on my street, and I'll definitely check it out. So, do you have any sort of GitHub accounts or anything you want to share to help people get up and running, or anything, or even others that you think would be useful?
Well, I mean, following the whole of the IoT team, people like Olivier Bloch and Pamela Cortez and Benjamin Carbe and Paul DiCarlo and people like that. If you follow those people, the IoT team, follow the Microsoft IoT Twitter stuff. And, obviously follow me, Pete
Yeah.
_codes on Twitter. That goes without saying. But honestly, the Microsoft IoT team is fantastic. They're really engaged with the community and happy to help. And there's an IoT show that Olivier Bloch and Pamela Cortez run. And those two, I mean, Olivier tends to concentrate on sort of the interview style stuff and demos. And then Pamela does deep dives, so hour-long versions of these shows where they deep dive into the tech and how it works and how to use it. And that all on its own is fantastic to be able to see. And you've asked me a couple of questions there about practical uses, because obviously it's quite a nebulous idea without seeing how you can use it. And they delve into the detail of that. I think they've just done an Arduino deep dive, actually, which I need to go and watch. I've not had time. I mean, I've got a website, my Pete Codes website here, and obviously you can go and you can find out the talks that I give. But worth following me if you want to come and listen to me evangelize about stuff like this for hours on end. But I've got a few blog posts in here, and then my talks a bit further down. But I mentioned the Raspberry Pi earlier, and if you're a C# dev, then you can do .NET Core on the Raspberry Pi, which used to be quite difficult. But I've helped the community, and there's a single line install now that I've made to get .NET Core 3.1 installed on a Raspberry Pi. You go ahead and install that, and then you can do a .NET -- info, and the world's your oyster as far as C# is concerned. Then I mean, you can do all the IoT Hub stuff or IoT Central just with the SDKs, the .NET SDKs, then, and go ahead and do that. I've got a GitHub account as well, and I think I'm PJG Pete Codes on GitHub. There I am. So you can go and have a look at my GitHub repos. There's some stuff for that .NET Core 3 and .NET 5 on there as well. There's a lot of unfinished projects on my GitHub repo. But there'll be code from my talks as well on there. So
that's awesome. What I'll do, Pete, if you can send me over links, what I'll do is I'll embed them in the description for anybody watching after the fact. So if you can send that over on Twitter, I'll get all that on. And Pete, just one last thing. I hear you might be doing a Pluralsight course.
Yes, yeah. Well, before that, even I'm on Twitch with Liam and Jonathan as well, and we're on Azure-ish. I mean, I'm on Twitch myself as well, but there's Azure-ish Live for that, and so go and have a look at that. But yes, that AZ220 I mentioned, I helped create that, and I'm a recently inducted Pluralsight author, and one of the reasons why I wanted to get involved in that is because Pluralsight have got a requirement to make a learning path to be able to pass that AZ220 exam. And obviously, having created it, I'm in a unique position there to be able to write the content correctly. So I'm starting out right at the very beginning. There's something called the objective domain document that you see on this exam just here. This is a skill outline just there that goes into all of the different parts of this overview sort of level stuff here. And I'm starting right at the create and configure an IoT hub level. So right at the very start, and taking people through and showing them sort of in a guided, knowing that the exam is your purpose way, Without, I mean, I'm a consummate professional. I shall definitely not give any questions away whatsoever. You will not find the answers to any of the exam questions directly in my course material, but I certainly will try and cover it in a way that if you've gone through that course, then you should be able to pass the exam. So using that as another platform for you on top of the learn content should be good. Hopefully that will be coming out sort of this side of Christmas, if I get my finger pulled out and get it created.
Sounds like you've got enough to be getting on with, to be honest, Pete, with
Yeah.
all the work, the 17 meetups, the 5 podcasts. It's like listing the 12 days of Christmas, but instead of 12 days of Christmas, you get the 12 days of podcast. My true love came to me. Anyway,
it's a bit like that.
Yeah, but honestly, thank you very much. That was really awesome. Really enjoyed. I learned so much, by the way. I don't know who else. I mean, ultimately, obviously, a bunch of other people probably learned as well. Honestly,
we didn't even talk about DevOps either, which is incredible. Just ran out of time. But yeah, you can hook this through Azure DevOps. You can do all of that. Rest assured, and there's a talk of mine on Twitter and YouTube there that I'm sure you can go and find. I think so. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll pop that in. Obviously, for those who do view, I hate to do this, but please, smash the subscribe button and all that. But honestly, Pete, it's been a pleasure. Learned a bunch. Hopefully, others have as well. But until next week, enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks very much.
Cheers, Pete.